go back through what is going on with Starmer and China. Because it's a bit he said, she said, their fault, my fault, the last government's fault. Everything's the last government's fault. Remember that. Nothing is the Labour Party's fault. It's all because of the Conservative Party. I'm not sure how many more times you can play that particular record. But what is quite clear to me is there is an interconnected interdependence, a parasitic relationship between China and the Labour Party. At the very least, the number of ministerial visits that have already taken place within 1 year of being in power shows you enough that the Labour Party are pretty much enthralled to the magic of Mr. Xi Jinping, all the wonderful things he can offer them at cut price deals. I think they've become so entrenched with China that actually upsetting their mates over in the Communist Party could land them in some hot water. And so lily-livered and weak as they are, and also, frankly, they don't care about the West, they're doing everything they can to make sure that they do not displease the Chinese Communist Party. But who did put the bit of government advice, the direct citation from the Labour Party manifesto, in that recommendation? Who was responsible? Is it the CPS? Are they the ones being weak? Did they have enough to go on to actually continue this case? Was it deliberately collapsed by the Labour Party? Was it someone in the Labour Party who said to the Deputy National Security Advisor, well, OK, you can say that we're a bit worried about China, but you've got to measure it with this, that we're going to work with them where we can. I mean, who is it? Whose agenda is this to appease Beijing? Let's speak now to Luke de Pulford, co-founder of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. I mean, whose is it? That's the big question, isn't it, Luke? Who is the one who's trying to, do handstands and cartwheels to make sure the Communist Party in Beijing aren't upset?
Well, look, I think when we finally know the truth and when everybody has had to answer questions about this story will be written with a title, and it'll be something like Willy Waving, Cock Up and Cover Up, because everybody has made mistakes here, and not just mistakes. I think they're quite deliberate mistakes on the part of the government. When it comes to the cover-up, it seems quite clear to me that the Deputy National Security Advisor was asked to include statements that ended up softening the evidence that he provided to the Crown Prosecution Service. I can't see any way around that. The idea that he acted completely on his own, with no reference to his boss or anybody else, is really ludicrous, especially given that it was his job to represent the view of the government. The Crown Prosecution Service itself has got questions to answer, because they didn't proceed with a case where it seems to everybody looking at it there was ample evidence. The Crown Prosecution Service had prosecuted cases before that had a higher threshold around defining an enemy for the purposes of the Official Secrets Act. They'd done it before with a higher threshold. Why couldn't they proceed with this one? I think there are real questions to answer there. And it feels to me that there's been some institutional jockeying as well, some kind of toing and froing between the government and between the CPS over all of this, about removal of certain pieces of evidence, about inclusion of certain pieces of evidence. So I think everybody has serious questions to answer here. The really worrying thing is that when the Prime Minister came to the House of Commons, he gave two cast iron commitments. He said, one, the Labour Party's policy had nothing to do with any of this. It was all about the previous government, in which case, why are there paragraphs from the Labour Party manifesto in the evidence? Secondly, he said the Deputy National Security Advisor acted totally on his own. And I don't know if that's going to hold true after the weekend.
Well, why was he acting completely? I mean, like you said, it just doesn't stand up. It doesn't meet with credibility, because where's the National Security Advisor in all of this? Can anybody explain why so many Labour ministers have taken an aeroplane over to Beijing? It's good to see that MI5 are sort of quite prudently and pragmatically playing their own part, even talking about how they even very recently thwarted a Chinese plot to attack Britain's national security. Just last week, you've had former Director of Communications for Number 10, Dominic Cummings, lifting the lid on quite how the Chinese Communist Party, Chinese spies, were able to penetrate what should have been a secure messaging system used at the very top of government. We've then also heard that the big mega embassy they're planning to build just the other side of the River Thames, they actually intend on turning into essentially a big Chinese spy centre. And yet, And yet, it seems to me this government are not just spineless, but totally unable to do anything about it, because by this point, they're already too embedded. That if suddenly they had to extract, if China were to be vengeful in the wake of this prosecution and decide to start, I don't know, not selling us windmills and not selling us solar panels and pulling themselves out of all their investments, or indeed even just flicking the kill switches on the solar farms that already exist here, that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We've cozied up to them too much already.
Well, I've been arguing for years now that we should audit and reduce our dependence on China. But the truth is, we're not actually in as bad a position as many other countries. The UK still has, by the way, a £40 billion deficit in trade with China. They export way more to us. And, by the way, it's often forgotten that they don't really do foreign direct investment anymore. This dropped off a cliff from China in 2017. So this kind of dogma within the Treasury that we have to tithe ourselves to the Chinese economy or we're going to be ruined isn't actually based in much evidence. So I think it's important for us to say that, because this whole dichotomy between national security and economic prosperity is a false one. I also want to raise something that's just happened now. The Chinese government has just attacked and threatened the UK over the embassy delay. It was delayed again, as you've reported. And what they've said is that the UK will face the consequences, but buried in this statement is something very interesting. They say the UK must fulfill its commitments and obligations. The commitments word is incredibly important because, as you know, with a called-in application like this, a planning application, the UK government cannot have a view. It cannot give any commitments. But it was reported last week that assurances had been given to the Chinese that they would get their embassy. Such assurances would be unlawful.
By whom?
Well, by the UK government, by various parts of the UK government, probably the Foreign Office. We don't know. But what's so interesting is that journalists have been digging around this for a while, trying to say, have you given the Chinese assurances you're going to get your embassy? Because that wouldn't be lawful. And today, in the spokesperson's statement for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs China, you have him saying, you must stand by your commitments. This is going to be a huge story, because if there were commitments made, they would be unlawful and they're not getting their embassy.
Well, I think it seems to me quite logical that the Labour Party and the Labour governments have probably made promises to Beijing. I mean, you can't just keep flying ministers over there. What on earth was Rachel Reeves doing flying over there as Chancellor before the last budget? Did she have to get a Chinese calculator specially made so she could make her sums add up? Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, he's been hanging out over there. Sir Keir Starmer himself had the intention of going on a state visit to China. Indeed, it does say in their manifesto, oh, they put in the checks and balances of we're going to take precautions and so on and so forth. But they very much want to work in China. Ed Miliband especially can't get enough of the net zero stuff. And herein lies our issue. Herein lies our issue that clearly they have made some commitments on these trips. We don't know what was said on those trips. We didn't really ask the questions back then of why so many people were going over to China. And it seems to me now America especially is incredibly worried about our relationship in China.
Yeah, well, that's a real worry, because obviously if you frame this kind of thing between China and the US in terms of great power competition, the UK is going to have to pick a side, and it will not be able to play both sides. Beijing is not going to tolerate that. One thing I'd say to your points before, it's often overlooked that it is an explicit policy of the Chinese Communist Party to make other countries dependent upon it. Xi Jinping himself in 2020 said that they wanted to mount deterrence and counterattack, this is a quote, deterrence and counterattack against other countries by fostering total dominance in what he called killer industries to make other countries more dependent on China. Could we have walked more obviously into the trap? I mean, it's not as if this is even a secret. They are trying to inculcate dependency so countries are over a barrel, so they do not have the ability to stand up for their values and national security. And we're seeing that play out in real time now in this mess that the government is facing. We are indeed, and I'm just looking forward to the sort of Damocles to come crashing down on somebody, although I just have this feeling that these governments are like Teflon. Luke, thank you ever so much. Brilliant analysis there. Luke de Pulford, co-founder of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China.